On April 26, 1838, on the back of a 10,000-mile journey from Imperial Russia, illegal slaver Captain Thomas Bernadas pulled into a port in northern Cuba, somewhere between Havana and Matanzas. His boat, the Goloubtschick, was loaded with more than 300 slaves picked up from the coast of Western Africa. The Goloubtschick wasn't like the other slave ships in the harbor, however, for Captain Bernadas and his crew had a dark secret, one that was likely to lead to lengthy prison stays if it was ever discovered. Our story starts 2 years prior in 1836, when the Cuban slave trade was still very much alive, but also very much illegal. Slave merchants Don Antonio Alarto, Don Francesco Lauro, Don Ramon Ferrer, and Captain Thomas Bernadas came up with a devilishly clever scheme to evade the slave trade authorities. Their plan was to get around the restrictions by running a Spanish slave ship under a Russian national flag. Using the Russian flag would allow them easy access to ports because nobody would ever expect a Russian vessel to be carrying slaves to Cuba. Alarto, a Cuban merchant, pretended to sell his ship to Lauro, who was actually a Russian citizen from Odessa, even though he had a Spanish name. The sale allowed the Russian Lauro to legally register the ship in Odessa, at the time still a part of Imperial Russia. To further deceive the British and Spanish authorities, Lauro also changed the name of the vessel to Goloubtschick. Captain Bernadas, likely a Spaniard, piloted the ship into Odessa in October 1836 and hired a crew of 14 sailors, 8 English and 6 Spanish, and the ship soon left Russia in December. Thus, Ferrer, Lauro, and Bernadas' plans were well underway. After departing Russia, the Goloubtschick made a stop at Constantinople in Turkey, which was still then under the control of the Ottoman Empire and the Sultan Mahmud II. From the Islamic city, Bernadas and the ship arrived in Barcelona, Spain in June 1837 after several trying months at sea. Once resupplied, the ship's itinerary had them heading to Bahia, Brazil to unload their cargo. But the slave conspiracy called for another port. Instead of Brazil, Bernadas and the crew made a stop off the coast of Africa, likely at Sierra Leone, where they picked up as many as 340 slaves. A year and a half after first departing Russia, on April 26, 1838, Bernadas and company landed at a port between Havana and Matanzas in Cuba. 34 of the slaves had died during the Middle Passage, most likely from starvation or disease. It's unknown if there was a slave revolt during the journey, but such things would not have been unheard of. After arriving in Cuba, the Goloubtschick worked quickly to avoid the watchful eye of authorities or their paid spotters, and Bernadas and his crew transferred the surviving slaves from the Goloubtschick to his partner Ferrer's vessel, the Principeño. In exchange for the slaves, Ferrer gave Bernadas cargo, including sugar, coffee, and cigars. After loading, Bernadas hightailed it out of the Caribbean and headed for Marseille, France, evading the British and Cuban authorities pursuing them. In Cuba the next day, Ferrer took his human cargo to a wharf near Havana and unloaded the 306 surviving slaves from their underdeck prison. Ferrer had to bribe the local officials to allow the illegal shipment to be offloaded, and the notoriously corrupt Spanish customs agents were more than willing to partake. Word of the slave shipment still reached British officials, however, and Judge James Kennedy in the British and Spanish Mixed Court of Justice ordered inquiries to be ordered by both the British and Spanish into the incident. The Anglo and Hispanic investigations failed to implicate anyone in specific, though the British noted there was ample evidence of the corruption of the crew and of the officers in the harbor, and they suggested the Spanish may have purposely avoided finding the truth, for it was their officials at the harbor after all. The British also noted a similar incident had happened around the same time, when as many as 750 slaves a day were being offloaded in the Havana ports with the custom officers' knowledge. After evading the authorities and arriving in Marseille that June, Barnabas and crew unloaded the sugar, coffee, and cigars they had gotten from Ferrer. Then, they prepared to make another slaving journey back to Sierra Leone. The crew departed for Sierra Leone in November, but this time with a new captain, Matthias Mestre, though Barnabas stayed on. Preparing for a bigger haul, Mestre added dozens more crew numbers, bringing the total to 41. Just over a month into their new journey, on January 24, 1839, British Lieutenant Commander Henry Worsley Hill stopped and briefly detained Mestre and his crew just outside the Mediterranean on suspicion of slave trading. Hill, referring to the vessel as the Goloubtschick, was not allowed to search due to the Russian flag, meaning the original ruse actually worked. While he had them stopped, however, Hill saw all kinds of slave trade paraphernalia in plain sight, but there was nothing he could do at the time. Still, the incredulous Brit kept tracking Mestre and his crew, and he caught up with them again on April 19th, but this time he arrested them just off the coast of Sierra Leone. The crew was taken to face justice, but that proved to be much easier said than done for Hill and the British. Once back, the British and Spanish Mixed Court of Justice refused to hear the case. They would not prosecute a foreign-owned ship without the owner being present, and Hill was unable to arrest Lauro. Back in Odessa, the Russian government opened a third inquiry into the matter at the behest of the British, and they interviewed Lauro. Not surprisingly, Lauro refused to admit anything and claimed no knowledge of the ship's slave trading enterprises. Captain Barnabas was also prosecuted for his role, and he became an informant and revealed to the British the inner workings of the illegal slave trade. Eventually, the ship was confiscated by the British for slaving and sent to England to be auctioned off. A group of merchants bought the ship, renamed it the Augusta, and once again returned it to active duty in the slave trade. The ship soon became infamous among British authorities again as another notorious slaver ship, and operated heavily in the Sierra Leone and Cape Coast area. Yet, the Augusta's days were short-lived, and in 1841, Lieutenant Commander Hill once again caught up with his renamed former nemesis and ordered it to be prosecuted once again for slaving. The eventual fate of the Goloubtschick and Augusta is unclear with my limited archival access, nor is that of Lauro, Ferrer, Barnabas, Alarto, or anyone else involved in the conspiracy, least of all the slaves. In all, the Goloubtschick probably traveled at least 10,000 miles between Odessa and Cuba, an impressive distance considering the time and technology. The journey took the lives of at least 34 slaves, who may have been the lucky ones to escape an even worse fate in Cuba. So ends the strange and confusing tale of the Goloubtschick, for now, the crazy slave trading story you had never heard about. Make sure to check out my channel, Hobbyist History, for even more history content.